all of a sudden you have a moment alone and it feels like the whole world collapses in on you.
I felt lonely before. I've been lonely before. I've never felt that level of loneliness before.
It was in that moment that it all became a lot more real. The medical examiner had a theory about how he got those injuries because it's a mystery,
It
right? So
is a mystery.
they have to piece together, what happened to this person, and very rarely in those cases is it black and white.
The funeral home, they don't care if you don't have money. It's like you have to use them. They are not going to give you a body any other way. They're not going to give you your loved one.
It feels like they try to take advantage of people in a vulnerable state.
And just do it. Don't ask. Don't be like, what do you need?
I don't
We
know
don't
what I
know.
need.
We don't know what we
I've
need.
never dealt with this before.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going. So day 2.
Day two. I don't even remember waking up that morning.
No, like I said, it was it's all been that whole first week up all the way up until the funeral, which was the following Saturday. That whole
Yeah.
week and a few days was all a blur, all
Except there's
jumbled
like
together.
specific things that you remember, but it's just like I think with all trauma, like it's maybe not always in order. You remember specific key details, but it's like you have to try to figure out the timeline and put it together.
Right. I don't remember waking up that day, but I do remember we had that day. I think we had 60 something people come through
Yeah,
our
that was
house.
later in the day.
Yeah. I don't remember anything up until people started showing
Yeah.
up. And I think people, like I said, people stayed the night at our house as well.
A few people, not like a lot.
Yeah, but you know, uh, there's not a lot I remember about that second day other than we started getting a little bit of like preliminary results from the
Yeah,
autopsy.
so let's back it up to the autopsy. So, like, what happens, just again, if nobody's experienced this, I certainly hadn't prior to that. But in this situation where they're performing an autopsy, they they called well the medical examiner's assistant called that later that day on Thursday after he had passed away, and they go through like, so it's not like they just take the information from the scene and, you know, do their examination and then determine the cause of death. They take into context everything that is going on with that person. So they want to know if there had been anything going on with his health leading up to his death, if there was anything else going on that was abnormal, socially, um, mental health wise, etc.
Well, and when somebody dies alone, somebody that young especially, a lot of people's, I think even medical examiners kind of first inclination is to rule out whether or not it was like a suicide.
Right. Which
Um,
they made it very clear that there wasn't anything that looked suspicious in the death,
for intentional.
or just even in general. It
Right.
didn't look suspicious in general. But the state law requires that if they die alone, and they're not at home, well, even still, but the circumstances, even though there was nothing suspicious, um, that they could see, still required a full investigation and autopsy. Um, so, which was, I mean, ultimately worked out in our favor because we wanted to know what happened too. Um, but yeah, the medical examiner assistant, they go in and they want to know everything. I mean, everything about their health, their medications they were on, things that have been going on socially, mental health wise, even to the point like they go back all the way to when they were younger. Like, did they ever have issues with different things like mental health, depression, anxiety? Did they have issues with drugs when they were younger? Like, they just want to know all this
Well, and
details.
they have to, and it makes sense. They have to build a picture of this person's
Right.
life to try to piece because it's a mystery,
It
right?
is
So
a mystery.
they have to piece together, what happened to this person, and very rarely in those cases is it black and white. So it's
Yeah.
an investigation,
And
and
I
so you have
will
to get all the details
Yeah.
possible.
And I will say that, I was extremely open to everything that was going on, the stuff again that we'll get into later that was going on with Eric up until he died. Very honest, very straightforward about it, talked in detail about some of the things he was struggling with, all the things. And it did, in a sense, come back to bite us in the butt. And it made things extremely difficult because, unfortunately, what happened was the medical examiner had a bias going into that autopsy based on the things that I had shared about Eric leading up to his death. It did color and filter his interpretation of the autopsy results. And again, being a medical professional myself, I can read the autopsy without the commentary. I can read it and look at it and know what it's saying. And let's just say that the autopsies,
Assumptions
us
about him.
well, their determination was inaccurate and the facts of the autopsy did not support it, which caused a lot of problems that coming first year of things that I had to deal with because of that. You don't have the ability to change an autopsy outcome. So when the medical examiner rules the cause of death and the determination of the death, unless it's like a criminal case, there's not like you can call the medical examiner and be like, I disagree with this. This is not, I want to challenge it and have it changed. So like, you know,
So honest,
whatever they rule, that is forever in that public record.
yeah, and it goes on their death certificate,
Mhm.
and then ultimately, in this case, it ended up impacting insurance and like your ability to support us, as a family, right? Like,
It caused a lot of challenges and
because
it made the first year very difficult. More
right.
difficult than it already was.
Well, and that second day, toward I don't know if it was the second day or third day, but I remember you working on arranging for us to see the body
Yes.
because both of us knew that we couldn't just have he couldn't just disappear. Like we had plans to cremate him, but uh just based on his own wishes and our own kind of beliefs around that stuff or what we prefer. And and so
There was no way we were not going to see him.
but at the same time, yeah, we needed to see the body because for closure's sake. I mean, he was gone. We didn't see him. Neither of us saw him for a few days.
Yeah.
And
And he traveled, so, like, it was very easy to trick yourself into being like,
right,
"Oh, he's just gone for work," or
right. Well,
"He's
and it's
gonna
like
come back any day."
you can't. Yeah, we've been told that he died, but until I see it myself, it's that kind of just like he just disappeared,
Yeah.
you know?
Your brain tries to come with up with every other answer except that's what happened.
Right. And so we needed to see the body, but we didn't, the funeral home kind of was trying to pressure us into like embalming him and doing all this stuff to prepare the body and because he was fresh out of autopsy when we were going to go see the body but both of us were like we don't first of all, we don't want him embalmed because that's a lot of extra money for us to just cremate him anyway.
I didn't want him to look like he was sleeping either. Like,
Right.
I needed to know he was gone, and again, it being in the medical profession, and working on the cardiac floor, eventually in the emergency room. Just we're exposed to death. It's not like it's a shocking thing in terms of like we knew what to expect what we were going to see, and
Well,
and
you
and
did. At this point, I hadn't seen a body like that
true.
really, but I mean, we really um
And
they were heavily advising us to not see the body.
no, they weren't heavily advising us not to see it. They were heavily encouraging us to have preparations done to the body.
Right. They didn't want us to see him as was post autopsy
Hmm.
because it can be traumatic to see somebody, like after an autopsy they do the Y cut, where they peel everything back and then post autopsy they stitch that back together.
Yeah.
And then like he also had that gash in his head, so they had to
Well, and
they had to check his brain and look for
yeah,
bleeding
they
and
like, he has an incision. They removed his skull,
mhm.
they investigated his brain. Um, so I get it. Like, again, the intention is good. Um,
But both of us, you know, weren't really worried about though like how he looked. It was more so we needed to see him one last time
yeah.
in
And we needed
person.
to
We needed to
know
see
that
his
he wasn't
body.
alive.
Right.
Like we needed that closure.
So post autopsy before we were able to see the body, they
Well, and
had
like
some
let's just back up for a second too. I want to say like I am so appreciative because again, not like you're expecting this to happen anytime really, but like especially at my age, I had no idea. Like, I had never taken care of a grandparent's funeral arrangements. I had never taken care of, you know, I hadn't had anybody super close to me pass away. And so I didn't even know what to do. And so I am so appreciative of my grandma. And like I said, that, my grandpa, his grandpa died 4 years prior, and my grandma had also taken care of other funeral arrangements. So thank goodness she was there, because I don't know if I would even know what to do or who to call. Um, and again, your brain is just so, like, it just doesn't work. And so I'm so thankful that she was there to help kind of facilitate that stuff. And I will say that thankfully my husband had just gotten a bonus prior to his death, because again, when someone dies, all of that, first of all, their income disappears. Like, it's not like he's getting paid from his job. All of his It's not like we could do anything with any life insurance we had, anything right away, because his death certificate was tied up, because the autopsy wasn't complete. And I had just thankfully we had just gotten his bonus, a few weeks prior. So we had a little bit of money in the checking account, but like the funeral home, they don't care if you don't have money. It's like you have to use them. They are not going to give you a body any other way. They're not going to give you your loved one any other way except through, a funeral home, a mortician, whatever. And just for them to go pick him up, it was like $800. And we did the very bare minimum, because again, like I said, we were, like Isaac said, we were going to get him cremated.
My dad's, um, I remember my dad's kind of philosophy around, when he died,
He had
is
a very, like, funny sense of
well,
humor.
when when you die, based on kind of what we believe, your body's gone. Like there's no reason to kind of keep it the way it is. We want to let it decompose and go back into the earth, kind of
Yeah.
deal. And I remember him saying once, like, once I'm gone, just like, just toss me out, basically toss my body out.
Yeah, he could care less.
Because and I kind of have the same idea about it, of like, when I'm gone, I'm gone. I don't really care what happens to my body.
Yeah.
So um
And which we knew that as well.
right.
But I mean, like, that's the thing, is that
Like, throw me away.
even knowing that we're going to cremate him, which is, fairly inexpensive compared to like a full burial, there's still all the stuff they have to do in order to make that happen, and everything costs money. And they're not
They're not shy about how much it costs, and they don't really
they're not sensitive.
yeah, personally, I feel like the funeral home industry is a bit scummy, um because they I mean, obviously they make money off of people who are in the middle of in that state of numbness and grief, where oftentimes it's really difficult to make a informed, clear-minded decision
Yeah,
about
so
these
for
things.
sure you
And so
should
they push
what they
expensive
think, and they
options.
push what they think would be.
Right. And well, and they encourage you to do things, like, they try to push it as like, this is going to help you have closure, this is going to help you, you know with what's going on, and like, you want to what's the word, honor the dead or whatever. And
Which,
they
if that's what you need to do to deal with the loss of somebody, then absolutely.
right. But I remember being in that meeting, and it felt like they were pushing expensive options onto us, in almost trying to take advantage of our state. Like, you want to honor the dead, so make sure you get a good casket, and make sure you do, the
Well,
um
in our case, it would have been an urn, but
well, right, but like, make sure you get all these extra flowers for the funeral, and like all of these sorts of things, um that ultimately just make them more money, and
mhm.
don't really, you obviously want to commemorate their life, and like, have a gathering, to a memorial service. Most people would want to have a memorial
or a
service
funeral or
just to have
whatever
some
you call it.
closure and have everyone come
Yeah.
together and that sort of thing. But the funeral home industry, in my opinion, in my experience with it, um, it feels like they try to take advantage of people in a vulnerable state.
A little bit. I mean, and they're don't get me wrong, they're very sensitive. It's not that they aren't kind or, you know, considerate of the situation that you're in. But yeah, definitely. I mean, they're gonna push what they can. And then on top of that, like there is no sensitivity to the financial state. So if you don't have money, they don't care. Like it's here, you pick what you need to do, and it has to be made, the decisions have to be made very fast because you don't have a lot of time
This
from
was
when the body's released to when somebody has to pick it up.
Yeah, day 2, day 3 after he
It was
died,
day
and
two.
suddenly we were having to make all these decisions, financial decisions about what to do with the funeral and what to do with his body and how we wanted to. And we had already an idea. We wanted to see his body quick and then cremate him, and
Yeah.
we didn't need a fancy urn.
Yeah.
We wanted it as ashes, but like we didn't really, we maybe would get an urn later or whatever. We didn't really need to spend a bunch of money through the funeral home to do
But even
that.
still, I mean, at minimum, it costs thousands of dollars just for the minimum to take care of his body, to see him, and to cremate him. And we didn't, I'm sitting here thinking from a practical side of things, like, okay, and again, I worked, but it's not like I'm going to work. It's not like I'm going to work after this just happened. And I don't know. I mean, stupidly, I thought, oh, I'll only need a few weeks off, which was completely moronic because I needed a lot more time off. Um,
Especially in the field that you work in, where you're having to take care of other. I mean, you were
just
you
in
were a nurse
general, there's just
on a
no
floor,
way. There's just no way the
right?
brain's gonna work. I really feel for those who have no choice and they have to go
And
back.
you were in nursing school on top of that,
I was in nursing school. Thank gosh. I thank God I had the people that I did surrounding me in school because I would have not made it through. And to me, it was like I didn't want to redo the last semester because I was 5 weeks away from graduating.
right?
Like it just, there's no way. And I don't know that I would have finished nursing school if I had put it off and like tried to restart it, because it's horrible then, but it gets worse before it gets better. And the best thing to do is to do those things that you need to get done when you're in that state of shock. But I think the big thing that I'm trying to say is that if I can give any piece of advice to anyone, make sure you have money set aside that's easily accessible. And I'm not talking like
Emergency
a
fund.
couple $1,000s. I'm talking like 10,000 or more dollars, because even if you have insurance in place, life insurance, accidental death insurance, whatever, if you get stuck in a position like we did where there's going to be months and months and months before an autopsy gets resolved, you don't get a death certificate and you cannot get anything without a death certificate. Um, we had a death benefit through his company, and they were so amazing. They were willing to just take a legal affidavit that like I was testifying that he had died, and they released that death benefit, which was not a ton, but everything helps.
Enough to get us through a little
And
bit of time.
but like, yeah, I mean, literally nothing. You don't have access to anything without a death certificate. And so yeah, in the funeral home, they're just like, okay, this is what it's going to cost. And, it's a significant chunk of money because it's not like your bills go away either. Like everybody wants to be paid. And they're just like, and you try to explain to them, like, this is what's going on. And, I am not saying I don't want to pay you, but like, can we have more time? And they're just like, well, you can have like a month to pay it off. Like, that's it. That's,
Yeah,
that's the max. And so, on top of having to make all these decisions, you're shocked. You're trying to come to terms and grips with, the things that are happening in your life. And then on top of that, you have to figure out, like, okay, like, how am I going to pay for all of this? Because everybody, no, like, unfortunately, as much as you'd like to be nice about it, like, nobody cares.
yeah.
They really don't. Like, people do, but they don't.
Well, especially people who
In
are
the like
in the
business
industry. Yeah,
industry, like people who have business, like anything that has to do with your bills, like nobody cares.
yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot of empathy on that front.
Mm-mm.
Now, in those days following as well, we had a lot of people come to our house that second day, and a lot of lovely people.
We had like 60 people
Yeah,
that
we had
second day, which
people
is,
who bringing us food and making sure we were taken care of, shoveling our driveway, salting our sidewalks because people were coming through, bringing us flowers and just being there with us.
yeah.
A
Our
lot of family, a lot of people from our congregation.
And had we not had our congregation, I don't know what we would have done. Like,
Yeah, it would have
it was such a huge support system for us.
really was. And um, yeah, I mean, the people that were there for us through that were impressively amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, they took care of everything. It
they
wasn't
took care
just,
of the funeral. They took care of us. They made sure we had food. They made sure that our house was taken care of.
yeah,
People were cleaning and doing our dishes, and like people really came through for us in those first few days,
they
especially
really did.
that first week or two. Um,
And then you also have people that kind of show up that you don't have like,
you're like, why are you here?
it's not that you don't have a great relation, but like people who are not super central to your life, or don't, like the congregation, that's one thing, because those people, like, even though we're not close to every single person in congregation,
We share a faith, and
we share
they
faith, we're
want to be
there on a regular
supportive.
basis, like we're in a part of this group. And then there are people that kind of show up out of the woodwork where you're just like, like, but also you're in that time where you just need every bit of support that you can get, that you also are so appreciative and so thankful that people are just showing up for you.
Yeah. Should we get into the actual like viewing, or should we talk about kind of the preliminary results of the autopsy next?
I think, well, the preliminary, we had our theories.
Right.
So again, our autopsy took 3.5 months to get back with the actual results, but it was like
They came back with some
the
physical stuff fairly quick.
preliminary autopsy came back like the next day, because they completed it Friday morning, and we got his body back on Saturday to do the viewing. So by Friday afternoon, they had preliminary
Yeah.
results.
And so some of the stuff that came out of that was he had two or three broken ribs on the side where his
I believe it
chest.
was 3.
Yeah, on the side where his chest was
His left
bruised.
side.
He had that gash on his head. There was no like
Also
brain
kind of on the left
bleed.
side. It was like here and then
Yeah. There was no like brain bleed or anything like that. He had a 75% occlusion in one of his coronary arteries.
yeah. But
Um,
it was not the cause of his death.
yeah. And
And
also,
neither was the broken ribs
right,
or the little laceration on his
right.
head.
And we also lived in Minnesota, which was icy in the winter. It was winter. It was still March, winter time, so it was icy outside. And the medical examiner had a theory about how he got those injuries, and they said that it was somewhat consistent with somebody slipping on the ice and maybe landing on their side or landing on the curb or maybe landing on his elbow or something
Yeah.
to get the
And
broken ribs at least.
it was it was very kind of shocking to us because he wasn't a clumsy person. He didn't get into fights. He wasn't a person that sustained injuries ever. Like, I think he broke his foot once.
He broke
Like,
his ribs once as a kid too.
well,
He fell off a roof.
I mean, that was, yeah. But I mean, just as an adult, like, I mean, he broke his foot once when he was like in his early 20s.
Hmm.
But like
I
he
remember
didn't
that because I remember he worked at New Flyer, or and he didn't he like take off his cast after because he had to go back to work and he didn't
he
want
just
to.
started a new job. So he like
Yeah, yeah,
he was like, I'm not going to tell him I have a broken foot.
yeah. Uh,
And so he just like toughed it out, and he was in pain for weeks
weeks.
and weeks and weeks.
Probably messed up his foot real bad. I don't know.
Probably. But yeah, he wasn't a guy that like had injuries. So like the injuries were very shocking to us, and we were even more shocked to realize that he didn't, like, they had nothing to do with why he died.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, he has all this weird stuff that happened. Like he obviously has broken ribs
Hmm.
and he hit his head and he's got this occlusion in his heart and he had that tooth infection, a
A
few
couple
days
days prior,
prior.
because that was one thing that did cross our minds as, again, working in the medical field. There is uh incidences that happen where you have a tooth infection and it can travel down into your heart.
Yeah.
And so because of the fact that like he had been found laying on the floor, and that it was like, okay, did he like try to get up and like collapse or have a heart attack or something like that.
Well, and even with the occlusion in his artery, it was like maybe he had a heart attack or just had enough of like an occlusion to cause some damage, and
Yeah.
then he died from that. But even they
But
said,
they
well, that
just were like, "No, it
yeah,
had nothing to do with," and they can tell all that stuff. I mean,
hmm
again, when we did actually get the report and we're able to read through it, yeah, you can see all that stuff.
and so then we got some details as well about what the scene looked like his
Mhm.
hotel room, and they found really the only like prominent things were that he was found on the ground next to his bed,
Face down,
face down,
like, right next to his bed.
right, and then
He was still dressed.
he was still fully dressed. He had
They estimated that his time of death, so remember that night, the night before, we found him, or, that we found out that he was dead, we I had tried to call him between 7 and 7:30. Um, we know that he got back to his hotel room. His last swipe in was 7:40 p.m. and they suspected at that point he had died around 10 p.m., 10:30 that night.
yeah, and
And
then they
so
found him in the and then
and we found him the next day around 10:30 in the morning. And so, like, we knew all that, and that he was fully clothed, that he
mhm.
had fallen next to his bed,
He had his
or that he was on the floor
he had
anyway.
his antidepressant pill bottle next to his bed.
No, it was actually not next to bed, but it was on one of the tables.
Yeah, and they didn't really know how much was missing from that, so there was kind of some speculation that like maybe he overdosed on that. But he also had some bigger cans of beer, like I think it was two
I don't know, it was like
20 plus ounce.
yeah, it was the bigger ones, the
Yeah,
tall ones, and then
yeah,
he had, about, not as
750 ml bottle of vodka that
yeah,
was, they said there was only like about an eighth of it left.
yeah, but mind you, he had been there for, like, 4 days,
Right.
so
Which
and
is still a lot to drink in that amount of
but
time.
also he entertained clients. I mean,
Mhm.
granted,
In his room, it was kind of,
it probably not as likely, but I mean, it wasn't out of the realm of, like, again, sometimes you look at that and you're like, I don't know. But then also,
we don't
he,
know the time that the amount of time it took
yeah,
him to drink that much, but
it just
and
left
then
a lot of
there was kind
questions,
of
is
like,
what it
well, did
did.
he mix his antidepressant pills with his alcohol intake?
And not like think about it.
Yeah, but also he had broken ribs. Like, if he slipped on the ice outside,
Did
was he
he?
trying to like self medicate for the pain?
Yeah.
There was all these questions.
We had some answers, but a lot more questions.
Right. Well, and we only had the physical side of the autopsy
Yeah.
back, which we were still missing the toxicology reports. We didn't know what was in
We
his
didn't know about
bloodstream,
what his antidepressant levels, or we didn't know if he took any other medications. We don't know how
how,
much
what his blood
alcohol he had
alcohol
in
level
his
was.
system. We didn't know if he had any other stuff going on, like,
Right.
if his electrolytes were off, because again, if someone has a cardiac arrest, sometimes it can be caused by potassium levels that are
hmm
imbalanced. I mean, there's just, again, it's like we had some answers, but a whole lot of more questions.
Yeah, and we didn't get the toxicology results or the death certificate for quite a
It was
while.
3.5 months, yeah.
Yeah. After, and so
And this whole time, mind you, everyone's wanting to know
yeah.
what
So what
happened.
happened? What was the results of the
What did you
autopsy?
hear? Did
And
you know?
all we had was the facts that we knew, which were, we gave him the physical facts, but like, also given the situation and the delicacy of that, and like I said before, kind of his wanting to protect him and his reputation, because if we didn't know
We didn't know
we didn't know the
exactly what
cause of
happened
death, and we didn't want that
to
kind of level of
speculate.
speculation
Yeah,
going around all of the people that knew him. And so we kind of chose to keep the fact that he had a bunch of alcohol like empty bottle, or a near empty bottle, and the beer in his room. We kept that to ourselves for the time being, because we don't want people to assume that like
it had something to do
it
with
had
that, or
something to
that,
do
like,
with
he
that
took a bunch of pills, or
when we weren't sure yet, you know. And so we only gave the results of the autopsy, which were he had broken ribs and a head injury and occlusion to his heart, and they still don't know exactly what happened yet.
yeah. And it was difficult too, because here we're trying to process all this, and we don't
So is
really have
everyone.
anyone to talk to about it, because it wasn't anyone else's fault. It was our choice, in the sense that we felt that it was the right thing to do to keep some of that information to ourselves
At
until
least
we
until
knew
we
what was
knew for
going on.
sure. Yeah.
But you think about that 3.5 months of not being able to really fully talk about
All
everything
the
that we
details.
were concerned about or that we were, playing through in our head or thinking through.
But and then in the same breath, um, everybody else was also trying to speculate and piece together in their minds what happened. Like his
Mhm.
parents, I remember grandpa having a theory that he got hit by a bus because,
Yeah.
and that the broken ribs were what caused his death.
Yeah.
And we're like,
Obviously the medical examiner's like, "No," but there was still like this, yeah, but do they know what they're talking about? Like it
right.
could have still been that.
And, so there were, throughout family and friends and all these things, there was all this speculation. We weren't really comfortable with sharing the full details yet because we didn't
No.
want to throw things out there that would potentially damage how people saw him until we knew exactly what happened.
Yeah. And also
And
just did not we didn't want people to be gossiping.
right, and well, and as we've kind of alluded to, he was dealing with some stuff before he died that was very personal to our family.
And nobody
Nobody
knew.
else knew about it except for us, and we
And maybe my
with his
grandma, I think, might have known,
yeah,
but like it
but
was very close to the vest.
with
Yeah.
his death, we were not comfortable with suddenly revealing like, oh, this was all going behind the scenes because that would have caused this big. We felt like it would have added too much to what we were already dealing with.
Yeah. And we were still trying to process all that stuff.
Yeah,
Like we still hadn't even fully come to terms with all the stuff that had been going
and
on.
we'll get fully into that
Mhm.
soon, but we're still trying to, we want to take this kind of take you guys through this kind of step by step how we were dealing with it.
Mhm.
And so we got those results and there's still all these questions, and then we went to the viewing. And the viewing was necessary but also very traumatic for everyone.
Yeah.
And I remember you kind of had this philosophy of like, it's not going to be a pretty viewing. Like,
No.
he's not embalmed, he's not prepared anyway,
No.
he's fresh out of
I
an
think they had to do
autopsy.
like a little bit of preparing because they
They had
try
to
to
stitch him back
cover.
up,
Well,
and
no, that's all done, but they tried in the funeral home. They try to make the autopsy parts and things like that is not as obvious. So they do a little bit of preparation,
well, they
but I think the big thing is that everyone is kind of like, are you going to do
public.
like a wake or my family is we have a lot of Catholic in our family, and so like if anyone's familiar, it's they do like a viewing. It's like a wake service before the funeral, and usually they're embalmed and made up, and they're asking like if we're going to do that. Well, we're going to do a viewing because we need to see him. We need to see him. Um but it wasn't going to be anything that was visually it was
It's
it
not going to be like a normal way. It wasn't. We prepped everybody to say it's not going to be pretty. Like, he's gonna be fresh out of an autopsy. It's gonna be very morbid.
He's going to be
and
modeled
and he's
and
and he-
bruised, and
and but also it's
he's
not going to
going
look
to
like he's
look
sleeping.
dead.
He's going to, yeah, I mean, he's going to look like a very dead person who's also at this point 2 days in without any embalming
Well,
is
at that
starting
point,
to
Thursday, Friday, he would have been Saturday afternoon. It
it's
was,
almost 3 days.
well, no, because it was longer because he died Wednesday night technically, so
Right,
it was
Thursday
almost
night, Friday night, Saturday night, 3 days.
3 nights. Yeah, whatever. Okay.
Anyways, 3 days in, it's not pretty. And so we were prepping people, but also I think you and I both had the philosophy of like, it's not our job to dictate
Who
how other
gets to see him?
people need to grieve and who needs to see him and who can't see him. Because if you're, other people had their own relationships with my dad and we're very close to him, and friends, family, whatever. And if you
And
and our thing was, if you feel like you need to see him
mm-hmm,
for your own grief process,
that's fine.
by all means, but
Yeah.
just be prepared. It's going to be morbid, it's not going to look pretty, and he's not going to look like he did when he was alive.
No.
He's going to be it's going to be kind of a horrific sight, to be honest,
Yeah.
especially if you've never seen that sort of thing before,
Yep.
you know. And
And
so
I will say though, we were surprised at some of the people that did come to his viewing.
yeah, I mean, everybody's different. Everybody needs different things in those situations. But there
Mhm.
were people there that was like, wow, I wouldn't have thought that you know,
Mhm.
needed this or wanted. And some people I think came more so to support us than to actually see his
Yeah,
body, or
maybe.
maybe it was a little bit of morbid curiosity as well. I'm not really sure, but
Yeah.
you know, it was kind of one of those things where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you know, it's not my job to dictate that
Yeah.
stuff. Now,
So
talking about his body and how it looked, it was very morbid
it was
and
shocking
shocking, and honestly,
and really surreal because I just remember being like, is this real? Like,
well, and honestly, as much as we both needed it, I think it was also a lot more traumatizing than, you know, we thought it would be.
I was so numb that
I
the
was
whole first year, so numb that even to this day, I don't necessarily consider it traumatizing. I still feel very numb around it.
right, which I feel like is a bit of a traumatic
Probably. Yeah,
response
no, for
where
sure.
you don't actually feel
Yeah.
what.
I don't feel traumatized, but that doesn't necessarily mean I wasn't.
Yeah. Well, and so I remember, you know, coming around the corner and he was kind of laid out on this table. He had a blanket over him.
So context, we got to see him first. So like we showed up, a bunch of people were with us who wanted to see him, and the funeral home obviously informed us that we would have the time to see him by ourselves first. I will say that I was hoping, I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back, I wish they left the door open into the room. And so even though we were in there by ourselves, like the people that had
Could
come to
hear
see
us
him,
and see us.
they could see us from afar and sort of hear us. And I wish we would have had a little more privacy because, again, we're trying to get answers too. So there was a little bit of curiosity on our part.
Well, initially, you know, it was again up to this point it was all very surreal, and you know, I still felt like I was numb and kind of in a dream state. And I remember walking in, and when I finally saw the body,
He's laid out on a table. He has a blanket up
blanket
to
over
his
him,
chest.
you know, but I had a whole nother breakdown, kind of panic attack, just like what happened when I first heard that he died. And it took me, I mean, it went on for a while where I couldn't get out of that state.
Yeah.
And not that that's a bad thing, like, that's a very natural reaction. But, you know, it was in that moment that it all became a lot more real as to what was happening, you know, which was part of the reason why we wanted to see the body in the first place, is
Hmm.
because it still didn't feel real. And there was that little bit of closure, you know, and so but then, you know, people started to kind of trickle in. And as I don't know what your first reaction is. What was your first reaction to seeing dad?
It just is a constant state of like, I can't believe that I am dealing with this right now. I can't believe that like, this is my life,
Yeah.
at this moment in time.
But then we had all these questions about his death and like the autopsy and all of these things.
Yeah,
And
we still
both of
didn't
us
have a lot
are
of answers, so
medical people, so there's
we're
kind of the
curious.
curiosity.
Yeah.
So it was a bit morbidly, as other people are looking at his body and kind of having their own moments and breakdowns and things. We were trying to kind of sneak peeks at like what was going on with the autopsy, and like, you know, he had kind of
Like,
the.
we're trying to figure out where this gash is because the way they explained it is like this huge gash on his head.
Mhm.
And, like, I don't know. And so we're just like trying to figure out like what
Well, and like
happened. Like,
he had he
we'd
had
never
the
had these injuries before. So like we're just like, what the heck?
well, and he had the like the Y cut, and it
But
was
that
all
was
stitched
covered
up.
up.
Yeah, but I still, well, you could still see the top of it.
No, we couldn't.
There was a few staples that you
Oh,
could see.
maybe I didn't notice that. I just remember like it being very clear and obvious that they had tacked his eyes down, which is very common if anyone follows any sort of
When he
funeral home
on
and
the left side of
morticians.
his head, he had that cut like all the way around,
Well, and
because we
they took
couldn't
it.
really see
Well,
the
yeah,
gash.
they took his skull off, but he
Yeah,
had bruising, because
and
he
his
had
ear
bruising
was
on his
super
temple.
bruised and swollen.
But I don't know if you remember this, that he had like a chunk of eyelash missing.
Oh, from
It would
I
have
don't.
been his left eye. I just remember looking at it being like, again, I've been married to this man for 19 years. I sleep with him almost every night. I know him inside and out. and he had like 2 or 3 eyelashes missing, just chunk in the middle, and I'm like, "That was not there before."
Also,
And
the worst thing that they did, um,
oh my goodness,
is so they they messed up his hair so bad.
so
They gave
bad.
him like a comb over kinda hair, like they
So
combed his
bad.
hair flat, and he just
Strict part down the middle
and so,
over to
like,
the
we're
side
crying, but we're also laughing at him
because
because
he would be so mortified.
yeah, we're like, if he saw how he looked right now, he would be
Well,
so upset.
he had short hair, he had a beard, but he would wear his hair like messy on the
Spiky and
top,
messy.
and his driver's license very clearly showed that. But I think again, them being mindful and conscious of trying to cover up the autopsy incisions, they were like, well, it probably looks better to try to cover this up. But for us, it was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, it's so ridiculous.
Well, and just knowing him, it's just knowing that
He would
he
have
would
been
be
so
completely
mortified.
mortified. Well, and he would have been, he just he would have never. If I could talk to him, I would never let him live it down
Oh,
how bad his
no.
hair looked.
No. And we always say, like, if we see him again in the future, which is the hope that we have, that we will totally just give him crap about that.
Yep.
Like, we will just razz him until
They messed up your hair, man. It was real bad.
yeah.
You looked like a total dork,
Mhm.
on the table where you were, you had no control over it, but you looked like a dork.
Yeah.
And I
Total
mean,
comb over.
mhm,
Just and it was like a sharp, very defined part and just
mhm.
like flat.
Yeah, and just for him personally
Oh,
and his personality, it was so
yeah.
contrarian to his look was so contrarian to how he was as a person,
No,
and it
I
just
mean, it was almost
oh, and I remember
unrecognizable.
your friend, your best friend, who was kind of our family. She's basically an aunt to me.
She's family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's family and family to him as well. And I remember we all mentioned it, and as we were in the middle of crying and
We're
having
all
our breakdowns, we
dying
were dying
laughing.
laughing as well, making fun of his hair because he would have found it funny too. I mean, that was his sense of humor.
Mhm.
We all razz each other and made fun of each other, and were sarcastic with each other because
Mhm.
that's just as a family and just
It's how
how
we
he
were.
was. I mean, that's who he was. He was a sarcastic, funny, deadpan kind of person
Yeah.
where he would make jokes and then just wait for people's reaction. And he
Yeah.
was very subtle about it, but he liked to make fun of people and but like it was always with love and it
Yeah.
was never malicious. It was just it's who he was.
And people, if they weren't paying attention, they didn't catch it because it was just
Very subtle.
he's very subtle about it. And so if you knew him or you were paying attention, it's just those one liners. I tell you.
But we would that was his sense of humor and that was imprinted on me and that was what you loved about him so much.
Hmm.
And so like it was kind of that thought of, oh, it would be so fun to make fun of him
Yeah.
about this right now.
And to be honest, like we needed that little bit of relief.
Well, and humor is the best medicine.
It really is, and we see it a lot in our field of nursing as well. Is like I think that
It's a
sometimes
coping mechanism, but
sometimes people think it's really insensitive, and obviously we try to be conscious of that. But sometimes that morbid humor and that humor, the inappropriate humor, is what gets you through these really awful things that you see on a regular basis. And so, kind of in
I
that
think that moment was the first time I laughed up until that point
me
after.
too.
Yeah.
Me too. And so sometimes you just need that pressure relief, of like it's just so much and it's so heavy and so like being
And then
able
you
to release
laugh
a little
and then you
bit.
start to cry even more because you
Mhm.
realize like all I would make fun of him so hard and now I can't and now he's gone and
Yeah.
you go back and forth between that whole like you have a moment of
Yeah.
laughter and then you realize it almost makes you realize how much worse things are because he's not here anymore and
Mhm.
and so it was those moments were very very tough for the both of us. I
It
mean,
really
and
was.
it continued for that whole week after where you know it was all a blur. I think yeah, I mean, I had to go back to school. You had so much stuff to sort out. I couldn't miss school cuz I was on the verge of graduating. I needed to get my ENT license
Yeah.
and I had
I
test outs to make up and
I was on spring break when it happened and I was able to take a few weeks off of school. I obviously ended up taking more time off from work. I initially told my boss like I need like a few weeks. I'm going to be leaving school for a few weeks and I'll come back, and I'm sure she was just like, "Uh-huh." But
Well,
I obviously didn't go back to work for quite a while, but, school, it was I had to go back because, again, I was just like, I if anyone has been through nursing school, you know, nursing school is awful. It's so
it's
awful.
terrible.
And
Um,
to have to think about, like, I might have to repeat this semester, if it's just not gonna happen. And I did have a really amazing support system who just really picked up slack. I had amazing instructors who,
we're very
worked with
accommodating.
yeah, they worked with me to get the time off that I needed. Because again, if you've been in nursing school, anyone in nursing school, like, they don't make accommodations for anything. Like, you are in nursing school, you accommodate everything to be in nursing school. So,
Well, and I
I was
even
very thankful for that.
yeah, and I was still working as well.
Mhm.
I had a job at a furniture warehouse, for a furniture store,
Yeah.
and I don't remember when I ended up quitting, but I do remember. I think it was a few weeks later. I don't even think I quit right away, but I remember I was having such a hard time juggling school and work at
Mhm.
the same time. And I don't, obviously you were a lot older than me, but you also had a lot more responsibility. I have no idea how you managed to do all of that. But even
Honestly,
me,
I don't know either.
you know, I had to focus on just graduating. And so I ended up having to quit my job pretty quickly after all that happened because it was too much on my plate. And, um, there was, I don't, there's so much that goes on and life goes on and you just have to deal and keep moving and keep going one step at a
Yeah, you
time.
don't get
There's no breaks in life,
no,
especially
unfortunately.
with bills and work and like all that stuff. Like you don't get time to just sit with your feelings most of the
Mm-mm.
time. And then when you do have that time, it's like you're distracted with life responsibilities, and then all of a sudden you have a moment alone and it feels like the whole world collapses in on you
It's very
because
overwhelming.
now you're alone with your thoughts and
Mhm.
you're alone with the grief and you're alone with you know all the terrible things you now have to face alone.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, it's pretty
and not
crazy.
that we were alone, but
Well,
when you're grieving
you are alone because 'cause you're not alone, but you're alone. I mean, nobody really feels exactly the way that you feel. Nobody really understands it. And
I remember having people, like I had somebody at the funeral come up to me, and I didn't really know her very well. But she came up to me and she said, I know exactly what you're going through. I lost my dad when I was your age. And especially with all of the mystery behind his death and the stuff that we were dealing with beforehand, um with just his mental health and all of the other things that we'll get into. But I just remember thinking to myself, like, how dare you say that to me? You have no idea what I'm going through.
yeah.
You have no idea how I'm feeling. You have no idea what my relationship with my dad was. You have no idea. You have no clue.
Mhm.
And for somebody to tell me, like, I understand exactly how you're feeling, nobody could possibly understand
No.
exactly how I'm feeling,
And
because
even
this
if
is it's a unique situation. And anytime somebody has a death like that, it's impossible to fully empathize with them
yeah.
and
You
this
might
is
have
something that
something
I've learned.
similar,
Yeah,
but you'll never know exactly.
no, because you can't live in somebody else's brain. You can't live in their body. You can't
You don't
know,
have the exact same relationship with that person.
right?
Even
And
if you're
so
close to your dad or you're close to your parent that you lost, it's a nobody has the exact same relationship with their parent as someone else.
in terms of, a lot of people get very find it very difficult to deal with somebody when they've lost someone, because there's a bit of awkwardness to it. I mean, I have experienced that with other friends and stuff who've lost a grandparent or whatever. Um, and prior to this happening, yeah, now having dealt with it myself, I know what I would want to hear, and so I'm a lot better at comforting others. But for someone who's never lost someone that close to you, it's very difficult to know what to say or how to be there for someone. Um, and it gets awkward, and a lot of people either choose to say nothing because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or they're afraid of upsetting you and reminding you of what's going on.
Which you can't get away from it. Like,
Right.
there's no remind.
It's like people are
Literally,
almost afraid to bring it up because they don't wanna trigger you and make you feel
and
bad.
literally to this day, it still is in the back of my mind all the
Mhm.
time. It's,
Mhm.
like, it's never, you can't remind me of something because it's already always
Well,
there.
and this specific event has, for me, I know for both of us really has completely affected every single aspect of our life since it's happened.
Yes.
My relationships with all of my friends, the entire way I look at the world, the entire way that I deal with my emotions and
Yep.
how I empathize with people, and all of it is completely different because of this that's happened to
Well,
me.
it was a life altering moment in time. Life altering.
Yeah, and so in terms of, going back to that moment of like, what do you say to somebody who's going through this sort of thing? You don't have to say anything other than I'm here. Like, I'm here for you. If you need to talk about it, I will listen. I won't, if you want me to, be comforting, I will do my best.
I
But
think just I'm here and I
I'm
will
here.
listen.
I'll listen to you. If you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to. If you do, I will listen. Um, if you want a distraction, I'll be that distraction and we can go,
And I will say that oftentimes when you're in the middle of that and this has happened to you, for those who might want to know how do they help somebody that they care about who has lost somebody, we don't know. We don't know what we need. We're not going to ask for help. Even if we had an idea of what we needed help with, like the effort and the mental capacity that's needed to figure out who to ask and how to coordinate that, it's just so much. You're so overwhelmed. So, like, the best thing that you can do for somebody in this situation is just go, what would I need in this situation? And like, food's great, all that stuff, you know, helping clean the house, all
yeah,
those
we
things.
we had people come over and do help us with chores just to take the load off of our
Yeah.
life.
I mean,
You
just
know,
think about practical things, practical everyday life things that people do on a daily basis. And in these moments,
they almost become
they
impossible.
can't think about those things. It's too overwhelming. And just do it. Don't ask. Don't be like, what do you need? Because I don't
I don't know
we
what
don't
I
know
need.
we don't know what we
I've
need.
never dealt with this before. you know,
And when you're in that situation, you're not going to ask because it's a lot of energy to try to
and
like to even just figure it out.
back to the whole name of our podcast here. People ask you, "How's it going?"
But they don't really want to know.
Or it's going. I don't know what life moves on. I'm trying to deal with it.
But
I
I
don't know.
and even like you don't even know how to verbalize it sometimes. You're
Right.
just like it's so complicated and so overwhelming and so again life altering that you're just like I it's going. I don't know.
It's things are happening, and none of it's very good and none of it's very, it's just I'm it,
Hanging in there.
yeah, and if that's even possible, and
Right? I mean, that's how you feel at the time.
and then you get the people who do want to know, and how's it going? It's going. No, how's it really going?
Yeah.
And those are the moments that you appreciate, because that's the other thing. A lot of times when you're in these moments, you respond with something simple like "I'm fine, it's going," you know, things are good, whatever, because you don't want to burden other people with all of your issues.
Yeah.
And when somebody takes that extra moment to be like, "No, I actually want to know.
Mhm.
I want to help you." That means so much
It does.
when you're in this situation. So if you are looking to support somebody out there who's dealing with something like this, just going that extra step and taking that little bit of extra interest to try to be a source of comfort, be an open, a shoulder to cry on or an ear to listen. You don't have to say anything. That's the thing that people get hung up on, is they're worried about what they should say. You don't have to say anything.
Just I'm here.
I'm
I'm
here.
here.
I'll listen to you if you want me to. I will just be in your presence. Sometimes that's the biggest thing, is
All you need.
I just want somebody to be there with me so I'm
Because
not alone.
you're right. Because I don't even know how to explain, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more later, but like
Especially you losing a spouse, the amount of
I
loneliness.
don't even know how to explain the level of loneliness. I've never felt
Well,
that in my
losing your
entire life.
life part. You were together for 20 years, losing your life part. That was you were together longer. Um, you had been together longer than you had been apart prior to that. You
Yeah,
got
I've been
married.
together longer with him than I'd been alive, like, yeah, than I'd been in before that by myself. Yeah, I mean, and
He was your life part. He was the person you relied on for everything in life, and
he
all of a
was
sudden he was.
not just my husband and the father of my child. He was my best friend. He was my family. He was the person I created a family with. We grew up together. Like we evolved and grew as people, you
You
know.
relied on each other very deeply.
We were partners and everything.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just all of a sudden you wake up one day and that person's not there. I mean, the very person that I would talk to about these horrific things that are happening in my life or the things that I'm dealing with literally isn't there. So like I'm trying to deal and cope with the things, the loss of him not being here, and the one person I want to talk to about this very traumatic stressful time I'm going through is the person who is not here. And yeah, so the level of loneliness, it's really indescribable. And I had never felt like that. I mean, I've felt lonely before. I've been lonely before. I've never felt that level of loneliness before. And people will never be able to they'll never be able to take away that level of loneliness, but being there and just being present and just, even if it's not saying anything, even if it's just being there, it does make a difference. It
Having that energy of another
Yeah.
body in the room who you know has your back and is just there for you.
Well, and I think also just recognizing that they don't have to fix it. Like they
You
can't fix
can't,
it.
yeah.
They can't fix it,
But
and
you can be there to
but just be
show
there.
your support
Mhm.
and just to show that you're not alone,
Mhm.
you know?
When I
Because that's the worst part is, and we'll get into this next actually, cuz next up came the funeral,
Yeah.
and that in and of itself was very difficult. But it almost gets worse after that point because then people start going back to their own lives, which
Yeah.
is obviously, you know, the world moves on, life moves on, but it's that moment when you're left to sit in it by yourself, and you don't have everybody there all the time anymore,
To distract you.
and it's like after everyone leaves, it's like after you have a bunch of friends over and you're hanging out and like just in general, and then everyone leaves and you're left in the silence, and that kind of in and of itself is a weird moment sometimes. But then having it when you're dealing with something like this,
Mhm.
like I said, you have all these distractions going on, and then the moment you're left alone with your own thoughts and your own feelings and you just have to sit in it makes you want to crawl out of your skin. It makes you want to be completely numb, and it's everything goes into a blur, and it just feels it's impossible to explain properly,
Mhm.
you know.
It's also impossible to think
There's
that
such a void.
you'll ever feel differently either.
Yeah,
Like it's really hard to see your way out of it. It's like on some level it's going to get better, but it's really hard to see
it's
it.
just it gets very dark. Your whole
Mhm.
outlook on things gets very dark very
Yeah.
quickly, especially loss on that level. And for you, losing a life partner is very like I was on my way moving out. I was almost an adult, and so like losing my dad, even though it was far earlier than I ever imagined or wanted. Obviously, you never want to lose anybody,
Mm.
but um, than I ever would have expected. Uh, it's still like I was on the verge of
Well, you were just gaining your independence. Like
right.
cuz you were exploring it being independent and
I
not
was I was going through the natural process of somewhat being more distant from my parents and
detaching.
going my own way,
Yeah.
whereas you were getting ready to be even closer to him,
Mhm.
and uh, and so it was very different. Even though it was very difficult for me, you had a whole different perspective about all that.
Yeah. But I will say, I mean, again, I think we both recognize that we were going through different things. And I think the thing that sometimes is a little bit more challenging for you is because you haven't been in that situation yet. Like, I have had my parents, I've lost my parents in a sense.
Well, and
Um, so I can, on some level, sort of put myself in those shoes and relate a little bit. Again, not exactly, because you can't ever exactly relate, but it's easier for me to sort of be like, I can imagine how this feels.
but I have not found love the way
No.
that you and dad had it. And you guys were my example of what that should look like.
Yeah.
Your communication and the way that you guys loved each other. And even though, just as with any relationship, you guys went through ups and downs, but you stuck together in a way that a lot of people in the world, just in general, don't do
Yeah, and
anymore.
we liked each other.
Yeah.
Like, we were
Very
just
deep. I
like
mean, you love each other very
we
deeply. And
not
like,
even love, but I mean, like, you can love somebody and not like them. Like, we loved each other and we liked each other.
so I even now still have yet to experience that level of commitment and love. And so sometimes even now it's still hard for me to imagine what
Yeah.
it's like to lose somebody on your shoes.
Yeah. You'll
Um,
get there.
but on the in terms of kind of what has happened next in this timeline is the funeral,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that was insane. It was
Again, a blur. Let's talk about it.
a blur and incredible at the same time. Yeah, let's talk about it. Hey, you know how this works.
If you like this episode or just like us in general, you can find us at It's Going Podcast on all the things.
Don't forget to check out the links in the description.
And thanks for hanging out with us.